I'm Michael Bungay-Stanier. This is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the blather and the BS and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change. If you are a transformational leader and you're seeking modern change mastery, here's where we're channeling our inner Edison to find the light bulb that works. Now, my early days in a career was in the world of innovation. I worked for a small agency. Our job was to invent new products and services for people. And in fact, the reason I got into change management was I was bewildered why all the ideas that we came up as an agency went back into the big companies we worked for and just died a quiet death of obscurity and deep lack of success. And it's fair to say that in 6 or 7 years in that company, I launched barely anything, and the stuff that I did launch failed utterly. So it was a fun experience, but it wasn't particularly a trophy-laden experience. So I've always been interested in how people think about innovation. And I think it's such a powerful topic for this conversation around change and change signal, because really, as you think about innovation, you're actually thinking about how do we make change happen in our organization, through our organization, kind of internal innovation, but also then what do we bring to our customers and who we serve in the world. So who's on the edge of innovation and what's interesting about that world works? Well, Simone Ahuja absolutely is. She is the CEO of Blood Orange, which is an agency that serves corporations around innovation. But for me, at the moment, in this moment, most intriguingly, she is a proponent of Jugaad, which is a principle from India about how we innovate light, fast, dirty, and brilliantly. And that's what we're going to be plunging into. So Simone, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. That was such a fun introduction. I love how you describe Jugaad in your own words, because it just really elevates it even further. And I'm very happy to talk to you and learn from you today too.
That's great. Thank you, Simone. So one of the things that caught my ear about what you're talking about recently is this idea of Jugaad innovation, and I know very little about it. So can you start at the beginning for me around what this is? I mean, what are we talking about? Give me a story around this.
Sure. And I'm going to start by quickly just defining innovation as doing something new or different that adds value.
Right. So as change leaders who are listening to this, hear this, because this means you are an innovator. Because if you're not trying to help lead and navigate and promote change in a way that adds value, well, then what's the point?
What is the point?
And so one of the badges you wear, one of the hats you wear is I am an innovator. That's the essence of being a change leader.
100%. And I will tell you, if you ask me what's different about what I do now than 15 years ago, I never really fully understood then that innovation is a change initiative.
Right.
So if innovation is adding value by doing something in a new or different way, and I think the caveat is it's not an invention, right? Because you can have something new or different that's sitting in your garage, nobody's seen it. It's not innovation until it really scales and finds value for more the masses or a larger group. Jugaad innovation is fundamentally different than traditional resource-rich innovation. So if I give you the comparison, traditional innovation is usually resource-driven, it's R&D driven, it's done by the people whose job it is to innovate, right?
Yeah.
Jugaad innovation is something that I learned about in India. So to be clear, I didn't invent it. I learned about it from people there and all over the world, including bootstrapped entrepreneurs in the United States, including farmers all over the world, like small scale farmers. It is a way to solve problems using ingenuity, creativity, and leveraging the resources you already have, which in turn makes it inclusive, right? So it's not just a few people at the helm of innovation. It is many people leading it. And typically, it lends itself to innovation for more people, not just a tiny echelon of people.
So what this means is if you're a change leader and you are overly funded, you have too many resources in your change project, you can probably dial off now. But if you're thinking to yourself, we're a little undermanned, underpersoned, underfunded, under pressure, then I think this is going to be a conversation that's going to strike a chord with you.
Yeah, and I'm going to actually speak to that too, about the people who are well-resourced. I recently was working with one of the world's largest technology organizations in their innovation group. So possibly one of the most well-funded innovation teams in the world.
Right.
And I will tell you that these principles of Jugaad innovation applied to them too. They were experiencing a lot of the same problems most organizations are, which is doing too many things, unclear priorities, and even if they have unlimited resources almost, you still have to be clear about where you're headed, how you're going to do it, and where do you want to apply the resources that you do have.
I mean, for sure, in some ways, sometimes too many resources is a curse as much as a blessing.
I think that's right.
Necessity is the mother of innovation, as they say. So when did you first encounter Jugaad?
So Jugaad started when Best Buy asked me to help make another documentary series for PBS about problem solving if you don't have a ton of resources.
Right.
I went to India. I lived there for almost a year, which was very transformational for me because I was trained here in the US. I have a science background. I learned a kind of more linear approach to problem solving.
Yeah.
But when I was there, I learned something different. I was on the ground researching how do people, if it's grassroots entrepreneurs or people in very large organizations that are MNCs maybe, but they're Indian headquartered MNCs, solve problems. And it was just fundamentally different. So I'll give you a quick example. We were capturing these video case studies for Best Buy, and I don't think we called it resourceful problem solving or anything like it then. And I certainly didn't know what Jugaad was. But we were in the Rann of Kutch. This is a desert in northern India, and we were looking at how these salt farmers were getting out of a generational cycle of poverty through these mills that they created would help them mine salt faster. And we had to capture it on video. And where we were was very craggy. The land was kind of bumpy. And we needed something that it was kind of like what you would call a steady cam in Hollywood. But we weren't going to get a steady cam in the middle of the desert. Our GPS was a guy with a long white beard. And it was scary because you really don't have any visual landmarks either.
Right.
It's very scary to be out there. We're running out of fuel. We're running out of water. We're running out of budget. We're running out of time.
We are out of water, we're out of budget, and we're out of time. I'm going to say that is not an unknown situation to many of us transformational leaders.
And I'm panicking, candidly, and I was telling my team there in India, let's go back. We gotta cut this thing short or we're going to perish here in the desert. They're like, no, we got this. We'll do some Jugaad. And I was like, what? What is that? And so they just sort of fashioned something to solve this problem. And they took some pillows and they took some PVC pipe and they took some twine and they tied it together and they created this kind of makeshift Steadicam that allowed us to get our shot and get out of there, on time, on budget, without perishing in the desert. And I thought it was fantastic. But then they did it again, and then they did it again. And then I started, of course, when you hear something and then you start paying attention to it, it's everywhere.
Oh, I'm thinking of that scene in the Apollo 13 movie where they have to make a square air filter fit into a round hole.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
It's not quite with pillows and PVC pipe, but almost. Definitely worth Googling if you don't know what I'm talking about.
And I started hearing this word all over the place and seeing that, all over the place, people have this mindset and this way to it's almost like alchemy. It starts with a mindset though. And the mindset isn't, hey, I'm going to wait till all the solutions and the resources come to me. It was like, I've got to fix this.
Right.
So I better dive in. And that was the genesis of Jugaad innovation. So Jugaad is more like a hack. It's like a life hack.
Yeah.
It's like jury rigging. That works sometimes. It's usually a shorter term solution. Jugaad innovation is something that emerged after I did this on the ground research, and we did a lot of secondary research, myself and my co-authors. And that's how we figured out, how do all these Jugaad innovators do it?
Yeah.
We put it through a sieve, and Jugaad innovation is sort of the practical application, the principles.
Well, let's go through these principles one by one, because I think that's going to kind of chime like a bell for people. So where do we start with that? What's the first principle that's most important to know about Jugaad?
Well, I think the most important one is frugality. Everybody doesn't like that word, but the truth is what I have learned is it's not about what can you squeeze out of your employees. It's not about can we make things that are poor quality. It's about what is the highest value we can create for end users, for employees, for shareholders with the fewest resources.
I love that. So what does it take to shift into that mindset? Because, it reminds me of my own kind of design principle with books, with podcasts as well, which is in some ways, what's the most I can offer in the least time? And for me, writing books, I'm like, what's the shortest book I can write that would be most useful? And it's trying to balance this smallest investment up front for biggest kind of bang for buck. But that's a learned mindset for me, not a natural one. How do you help people step into this kind of way of being, of frugality, particularly if you're working kind of, let's say, in Western cultures where there might not be such an inherent thing?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say I learned a little bit of this from you back when I was looking at writing my next book about the coaching habit. And it's simply laid out, but it's not simplistic.
Oh, thank you.
And so
That's
it was a
exactly what I
model for
strive for
me.
with that book. So thank you very much.
And to your point, it's learned.
Yeah.
You didn't start out like that. You
No.
had to learn it. So the things that you have to do, you have to start with the mindset, the belief that you can create high value with fewer resources, that you don't have to have the big title, that you don't always have to have all the answers right away.
Yeah.
That mindset is critical to Jugaad innovation.
What do you have to unlearn to become more frugal?
So the way our systems are right now is if you have budget and you don't spend it in this year, what happens?
You lose your budget.
You lose your
You
budget.
clearly don't need it. Yeah.
So it's not a great system. So there is a lot to unlearn, including the systems. What we have to unlearn, though, is that constraints are not a barrier. Constraints can be a catalyst for creativity.
I love this. I mean, I'm excited by a change leader hearing this and going, okay, if I'm designing a frugal change process, what does that look like? How might that be different? And how does even just calling it frugal rather than under-resourced actually shift the way that you think about what to deliver and how to deliver it?
I think one of the best exercises is ask people to solve a problem with not a cost out, like don't 90% of the resources, do it with 10%, 5%, 1%. No budget. Use whatever you have. That's a great place to start. It's just a thought exercise. It doesn't cost anything. And it's a wonderful way then to completely build from the ground up instead of let's retrofit this into the existing model. This is something I see all the time where brilliant ideas that can help end users dramatically are pushed to the side because they're not fitting into the traditional model of the organization.
So frugality, first principle. What's another core principle of Jugaad?
Adaptability, flexibility.
Okay, and what does that mean?
So that means, again, it goes back to the way you think.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I learned in India is it's not just that we have multiple solutions to a problem, it's that each of those potential solutions has a path that can be different. So how do we rethink that path to the solution that's hopefully validated? So let's make sure that we're really clear that we're solving a real problem. And I just want to underscore that because while it might seem obvious to people in our world, it's still the biggest disease that I see every single day. People are not solving the right problems. They got a solution. They're like, this is awesome. I think it might work. Do you think it'll work? Yeah, you do too? Okay, great. Let's go. So I just want to underscore
it's funny
that.
you say that because, you mentioned the coaching habit earlier and, one of the core questions in the coaching habit is the focus question, which is what's the real challenge here for you? And the power of that question is almost certainly the first challenge that shows up is not the real challenge. It's just the first challenge. But holy cow, it's seductive to try and solve the first challenge. And a drum I've been banging for a while is if you can become the person in your organization who gets known for figuring out what the real challenge is, that's actually a much rarer and much more valuable role than being a person who can come up with ideas because having ideas these days is easier than ever.
Yes, I'm going to beat on that drum with you, Michael.
Right. We'll just start our own little band.
Yeah, let's start our own little band. And I think, the adaptability piece, that is figuring out what the real problem is. It's who do we talk to and how do we think about what they shared with us? Are we being really empathetic? Are we asking open-ended questions? Are we observing, all the things that we talk about in innovation? And I think, that is something that is so fundamental to the adaptability piece. What is really hard, and I talk about this in my second book, Disrupt It Yourself, is fluidity. Keep it fluid as a principle of intrapreneurship.
So intrapreneurship, it's like the name implies. It's about bringing this spirit of entrepreneurship internally into a more bureaucratically inclined organization.
Because to your point, ideas are fine. Ideas are cheap, though, frankly. There are lots of good ideas, though. Let's make no mistake. There are lots of good ideas in large organizations. The reason I wrote my second book, Disrupt Yourself, about intrapreneurship is because the application of Jugaad innovation or that kind of thinking is very difficult in established organizations. So how do you have fluidity, adaptability in your model?
So is there a difference between fluidity and adaptability? And what's the nuance between them?
I would say they're similar. I often will talk about adaptability as a mindset.
Right.
And fluidity in the system of the business.
Okay, got it. So adaptability, frugality. Is there another principle that we should hear about with Jugaad?
Yeah, I think the last one is inclusivity, and this is that democratization piece. So it's not the usual suspects who are solving the problems.
Right.
And in turn, it's not the usual suspects for whom we are solving problems. We get to expand who we solve problems for. Example is like a medical device.
Yeah.
A lot of, medical devices can be expensive. If you don't have insurance, you may not be able to access it. If we think about it from a frugal innovation lens, maybe we create something that's so high value, solves a real problem, but it's very low cost and accessible. You're expanding the number of people for whom you solve problems.
Well, I'm really curious about this one because, one of the mantras that are in the world of change is, do change with people, don't do change to people. And everybody nods along with that. But it's pretty tricky how to do that because it just feels easier to do it to people. You maintain status and control and all sorts of other things. But B, even kind of more profoundly perhaps, it's not that easy to invite people into change because everybody's got their own stuff going on. And, this idea, and regular listeners will have heard me bang on about this before, around how do you invite people to increase their sense of agency, their sense of, look, I can do this. I have choices and I'm going to make choices. And I'm going to make further choices. That is quite an elusive, tricky thing to do. So I'm wondering how you practically have inclusivity, or even get specific, how do you make intrapreneurship, this idea of internal entrepreneurs, intrapreneurship, how do you help that spread in an organization?
Yeah, this is a really important question because I think this is where I see the greatest chasm between leaders and what they say that they want.
Right.
And the feet on the street, the people who are actually having to execute and what they hear and experience.
Right.
So for leaders, there are a few things. So one is, if I have observed many times, if I don't trust myself, if I have not done my internal work,
right,
even if I brought a team on, and especially perhaps if I brought the team on,
exactly.
I may not trust them enough to give them that autonomy, to give them that freedom, which is a huge problem. Mm-hmm. I would say that's a part of it.
Just to say, this is a really juicy topic. I mean, the insight, change is only going to happen if people have done their own work. And the Change Signal interview with Otto Sharma is a deeper dive into that if you're curious. Right, back to Simone.
The second thing is many leaders want to support this, but they have too many other things going on.
Right.
And therefore, they don't feel like, I can't do that hand-holding. If we do something that's coloring out of the lines, it doesn't fit neatly into the system, then I'm going to have to help too much. It doesn't work. And they don't have time to reflect anyway, which kind of connects to the next thing is, what are the simple systems we can put in place? What are the ways that we can teach people to do this so that doesn't have to be a big, heavy lift for leaders, right? And that's something that we really have to think about because people need to know how to do it. They need to know that it's going to be rewarded. It's going to be supported, right? That's its own new style of leadership.
Yeah.
And I will say the next piece, if we really want to think about what is important for leaders to think about, is entrepreneurship is powerful because it can be done on different scales. It can be done at a micro scale under one leader who wants their folks to operate more entrepreneurial. And frankly, I think it's the way forward because when I talk to new employees, they're so frustrated and they don't stick around for long. But if you give them some of that autonomy early on in small ways, they will stick around. But I think that leaders also have to think about, if they want systemic change, what does your strategy look like? Tell me about it. And how does that support innovation and entrepreneurship? And does it connect clearly to your business strategy? What does your governance look like? Show me the metrics, or show me whatever it is that moves your people. So we got to think a bit about it from a big picture perspective.
If you're enjoying this and want to dive deeper into Simone's work, the two best places to find her are her website, Simone Ahuja, so SimoneAhuja.com, or on LinkedIn. And of course, her books are findable in all the usual places. Can you give me some examples, Simone, or tell some stories of what it means to help set up some of these simple systems that can carry the weight of a leader's anxiety about giving autonomy to other groups and kind of pushing it out? What does that even look like?
I'm going to give you two examples. So one is super micro scale, very accessible, very light lift. Mm-hmm. And the second one is more like, okay, we're serious about doing this at scale.
Yeah.
And I know there are lots of leaders and C-suite folks who listen to this, but if we want to talk about enterprise-wide transformation, I'm going to do just a little bit of an eye roll. You have to be really, things have to line up, right? So the micro of how to do it is something that I would call recontracting, which is something that my organization came up with based on what we learned from real entrepreneurs. How do they do it?
Right.
There was one manager in particular at a large health insurer that I worked with. She really wanted to be more of an innovator. And I remember the first time she explained to me, very rigid, very hierarchical, very top-down organization, she explained how she was able to get her manager, her leader, to allow her to move forward with something that was very important and could solve a problem for the organization. And then I talked to many other people, and we distilled it out into a worksheet that I'm happy to share with your readers too, called Recontracting. So it's very simple. I have this idea. Here's why it's important to our strategy or goals. Here's why I care about it. Here's what it means for our customers. Here's my early plan. Here's what I'm going to share with you. And when I have some very, very early data, here's how I'll update with you. And here's the one tiny, tiny thing I need from you to help, right? I need you to introduce me to your peer in financial modeling. I'm making this up. But there's a small ask that keeps people connected, but it's not a big, huge ask. And that starts to set up the pathway for these entrepreneurs to be more autonomous and more independent. Also makes them very strategic in their thinking, and it reduces the burden on the leader. So that's the micro.
Yeah, that's really helpful, because what I see in this recontracting process is, look, we're actually doing a few things differently. So let's make explicit what is otherwise implicit, and kind of allow us to set some boundaries around what's being done and clarity around what's being done. So you don't head off and catastrophize and think about how this is going to be a disaster. I'm showing you how we're minimizing risk. And I don't make the mistake of thinking I've got permission or support that I don't yet have from you. And I love the fact that one of your recontracting questions is, this is what I want or need from you. Like there's actually an exchange of value to kind of seal the deal, which I think is great.
100%. And that seems to make a difference, right? Because as much as leaders will say, understandably, I've got too much going on. I'm responsible for this P&L. I've got a million other things going on. They do want a little skin in the game.
Yeah.
So
that's a micro example. You talked about a bigger, kind of more scalable example. What's that?
So the macro example, if you're really thinking about transformation at an enterprise level, or even within a COE, then we're going to start with strategy always. We're going to start with innovation strategy. Every organization doesn't have a clearly articulated innovation strategy, and it doesn't necessarily always connect to core business strategy. So if we can't tell people why innovation is important and isn't just like a shiny disco ball that we're thinking about, and we're going to have a really nice press release and then move on to something else, that's going to be a huge, huge problem. So it would start with innovation strategy that's clearly articulated. It would lead to an action plan right? That maps out, well, here's what it looks like. Here's some low-hanging fruit and easy wins. Here's what it might look like, bigger picture, if we can go deeper, which a lot of organizations can't right away.
Yeah.
I love the tiny wins, though, because we know that creates momentum, especially in change, right?
I just want to step in just to connect this to a theme that's really started to show up in these Change Signal episodes, the power of small experiments and how they're part of the game of playing for the small wins. Often the bigger game you're winning above and beyond the small wins is momentum and emergence.
The next thing we have to think about is governance. Who's overseeing this? Who actually is going to be the leader that has some skin in the game and that's observing, that's providing air cover? I think that can be done at the more macro and micro level too, is we need some air cover. When people are doing things differently, they need to know that they're going to be protected. They need people who are going to remove barriers for them.
Okay, just another suggestion for you. Dan Pontefract's Change Signal interview is pretty good on how to build air cover.
And then the last team is then you've got to build small teams, right? So we have small teams that are experimenting in ways that are low risk but high learning. And that's how people practice. Because even in really risk-averse organizations, if you come back and say, look, this didn't work the way I expected, but here is what I learned. I'm going to share that with this group. So that's not always rewarded, right?
Mm-hmm.
People often sweep those failures under the carpet, right? We all talk about it, but as we both know, as people who've done this work for a long time, it's like nobody really likes to fail.
Simone, tell me the characteristics of successful small experiments, both kind of what do they look like specifically in themselves, but perhaps also what's around them that allows a small experiment to be part of it. Because we've had previous guests who've talked about the power of small experiments kind of as a different approach to thinking about how do we figure out what to do, how do we kind of really replacing strategy. And it feels like an important shift, but it's like, what does it take to actually allow a culture of small experiments to really stick in an organization?
So I think the small experiments really need to roll up into strategy. And I think that's where things can go sideways sometimes. So, if I think about why does innovation not happen in an organization, we often have a lack of clear strategy, or it's not communicated clearly or often enough, or we lose focus. So I think the small experiments have to roll up into the core strategy so that while you might need a little air cover here and there, they're not going to be completely stomped out. To your initial point in the introduction, that's why you can't just take an idea that's very different and stick it back into the organization. It's going to reject it, right?
Yep.
It's the immune reaction of the organization. So I think what are the characteristics of a small experiment that make it successful are, first of all, making a big problem small. I ask intrapreneurs always. For example, I was working in a large government organization. There were 27 agencies involved. This was an IT project.
Yeah.
You can imagine it was a big legacy system. We had lots of patches in terms of technology. We had legislative cycles. So we had to break our problems down into something that the intrapreneurs could address.
Right.
So that's the first thing. The second is the thing we talked about, which is, are we really solving the right problems at all?
Yeah. I love that you're coming back to that.
I mean, I'm going to come back to that 100 times because people sometimes don't believe it when you say that.
Right.
It happens all the time. It is the biggest waste of resources possibly.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So chasing down things that don't really have value.
Yeah.
And that's all that part of Jugaad too. I think, the other thing is to make it micro. The experiment itself should be micro. Talk to a few end users, understand the needs, make sure that you're solving the right problems. Then you're going to test your solution. And that way, I think the best innovation frameworks are very similar. It could be Jugaad innovation. It could be lean. It could be similar to design thinking. Right? There are lots of similar principles there. But I think I illustrated the first ones that are important on the front end. On the back end, what's important is continued support. So I like to assign a sponsor or a partner who's at least a couple levels ahead of someone to have skin in the game to remove those barriers. That really helps a lot.
What makes for a good sponsor? Because we talk about that all the time in change. Who's my change sponsor? And sometimes it feels like it's just somebody's been awarded a sash that they can wear. And it's not entirely clear on both sides of the equation what the hell they should be doing. So how do you train somebody to be an outstanding sponsor?
Well, I love that you asked that because it does require training. I think there's so many things that people are expected to do without ever being shown or without it being shared that, hey, these are the characteristics of an excellent sponsor.
Right.
What I've seen in practice is that the sponsors who have been in those shoes before tend to be pretty outstanding because they've
Right.
experienced the frustration themselves, and they're really willing to, make sure that their team or that individual stays protected, to, call somebody on their behalf, or to create an introduction or provide a little seed funding or something like that.
Right.
So that's one thing. I think the other thing is a willingness to learn, because what we do in our systems, like we have like a 12-week sprint that's for these intrapreneurs. So it's sort of like the feet on the street, have a real problem to solve,
Right.
and take them through it step by step so that they get to a point where they have something to show for it. Usually, my favorite part is usually their problem statement changes once they think about, are we solving the right problem?
Yeah.
And then they execute on it, because to your point, it's not the ideas, it's can we execute on it in the larger organization. But that sponsor has to be there to help them think about, here's how you can execute on it. Nice. Here are some of the barriers you might face. I've tried this before. Here's how you might navigate it. This is, I think, fundamentally a really important skill of intrapreneurs and the leaders who support them, is understanding how to circumvent the rigidity in the system.
What a practical conversation. I like this. I mean, for me, it's fun going back full circle to my roots and the world of innovation. And I'm realizing that all along, it was not just about the thing we're inventing, but it was actually the change process around it that really gave it a chance for life or not. Now, you are good to me as a regular listener of the pod, so thank you. I appreciate all the help you give in spreading the word. My favorite? Not a review, although that's great. Not a post on LinkedIn, although that's fabulous. It's really a straight out recommendation to someone in your network. Hey, listen to this podcast. I think you'll enjoy it. And in case you're not there already, the newsletter and more is at thechangesignal.com. Thanks for doing the work. I'm glad you're here.